Hello, I am absolutely determined to make this video no longer than 20 minutes. And so if I get to the 20-minute mark and I don't have a conclusion or I haven't wrapped up, I'm just going to stop. So that's how dedicated I am, and I hope that's a bit of relief for you. Okay, so I'm going to pick up where I left off in my last video. I was sort of talking about how really the Roman Republic at its peak, when things were working the way they were supposed to, Rome was gaining territory and all that. We stopped around 200 BCE, give or take. And I'll just remind you for a moment that the function of this week in the course, this week is just history. It's just history. But it's not just history for history's sake. I'm also trying to give you the context that you need to make sense of the Roman art and literature and philosophy and religion that we'll be studying in the weeks to come. So I know it's a little bit pulverizing, the sheer volume of history we're covering this week, but there is a purpose to it. So we're going to pick back up around 200 BCE, and we're going to try to get to roughly 200 CE in this video. So how to do that? Well, there's really three in that frame of 200 BCE to 200 CE. There are three major periods, I think. So I'm going to say just a little bit about each one of them, things to be looking for. The first period is the period of the decline of the Republic. And this really starts around 133 BCE, comes to a conclusion, let's say 27 BCE, so about a 100-year period. This is a story that starts with the Gracchi brothers, and I need to give you a little bit of background here because the Gracchi brothers are trying to solve a land crisis in Rome. Why is there a land crisis at all? Well, remember I talked about the several Punic Wars that Rome was involved in the 200s, and then the last one was in the mid-2nd century. These wars were not, in the long run, beneficial for your average Roman. Your average Roman was a farmer, and many of those farmers fought in these wars only to come home and find their land devastated by warfare, or to find their land sold off to these sort of wealthy landowners. And so many of these farmers, former farmers who had a pretty good livelihood, are now having to work as tenant farmers, or they're having to move into the city. Meanwhile, the wealthy are getting wealthier. They are buying up lots of land and amassing these huge farms that were possible because of the slave labor that I talked about in the last video. Rome's success in wars means lots of new slaves coming in, people who were prisoners of war. And these slaves are put to work on these massive plantations. In Latin, they were called latifundia, Latifundia. So with the rise of slave labor, the small farmer is getting squeezed out. The Gracchi brothers, Gracchi, that's plural, the Gracchi brothers, starting in 133 BC, try to address this problem. And so you're going to be reading about their attempt, which is ultimately unsuccessful to address that particular problem. Here's what you want to look for, the trends you want to look for during this period of time, that 100-year period of time. First, you're going to see more and more politicians, including the Gracchi brothers themselves, being willing to cut constitutional corners in order to achieve their political agenda. So there are going to be a number of steps that are taken that don't really respect the Constitution of the Roman Republic. I'll mention just one other example, and that is the first triumvirate, which you'll read about. This is a kind of under-the-table deal made between three men. That's what triumvirate means, Triumvirate. This is an agreement made between Julius Caesar, his son-in-law Pompey, and a really rich guy named Crassus. And this was not an arrangement that really had any kind of constitutional precedent in the history of the Roman Republic. So that's one trend you'll see. Another disturbing trend is you'll see Romans resorting to political violence in order to achieve their ambitions. So we're talking about assassinations. Both the Gracchi brothers are going to be assassinated, but we're also talking about civil wars. Rome is going to witness not one, not two, not three, but 4 civil wars during this period. Romans shedding the blood of other Romans. So that 100 years after the Gracchi brothers first introduced some of their reforms, the Roman Republic exists only in name. The Republic that existed in 200 BCE simply did not exist anymore. And this leads me to one of the questions that I want you to answer in the discussion forum for this week. Given the fact that we Americans live in a republic ourselves, a republic that in some ways was modeled on the Roman Republic, are there any lessons for us to learn if we want to preserve our republic? Can we look at this last century of the history of the Roman Republic and learn some lessons that might benefit us as Americans who are trying to preserve a republic and not resort to tyranny? So I look forward to seeing what you come up with for that. Okay, the second phase of the period that I want this video is dedicated to is the reign of Augustus himself. So this is 27 BCE to Augustus's death in 14 CE. So this is not a really long period of time, but it's such a pivotal moment. Augustus really is, even though he didn't accept the title emperor, looking back as historians, we say, yes, indeed, Augustus was the first Roman emperor. One of the questions you need to be able to answer after you do your reading in West in the World is this: how does Octavian is his given name, how does Octavian become Augustus? How does that happen? And you'll need to know sort of what Augustus means and who gave him that name. He does not immediately rise to the top after the assassination of his great uncle Julius Caesar. He's going to have to contend with other rivals to power like Mark Antony. So how does Octavian end up at the top of the heap? And again, how does he become Augustus, this sort of unprecedented figure in Roman history? The second discussion forum question you have this week has to do specifically with Augustus and his brilliance as a politician, as a statesman. What would be a good example of that brilliance in action? Pay very close attention to how he proceeds after the defeat of Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. He doesn't sort of stand up in the middle of the Roman Forum and say, well, it looks like I'm your emperor. It's not how it works. So how does he handle this sort of delicate situation that he's in? And I'll give you a hint. I think the essence of Augustus's genius as a politician and statesman is the fact that he is really ushering in a new and novel form of government. All historians, are going to look back at this period and say, okay, by the time Octavian becomes Augustus, the Republic is no more. So he's going to make these sweeping changes, and yet he's going to retain just enough trappings of the Republic to be able to assure the Roman people that not everything has changed, that it's still the Roman Republic. In fact, what he's doing is restoring the Roman Republic. That's the kind of rhetoric he's going to use. So be able to give me some specific examples of how he does this. All right, well, as I said, Augustus dies in 14 CE. This brings us to the third chapter of the story that I'm talking about in this video. So something from roughly 14 CE to 180 CE. This is a period of time that's sometimes dubbed the Pax Romana, P-A-X-R-O-M-A-N-A, Pax Romana, means the Roman peace. So you need to know why this period of time is given that name. Now, the first thing to say is that actually the first half or so of the Pax Romana, up to almost the year 100, is actually quite bumpy. There are lots of ups and downs and some pretty dramatic low points. Several of the early empires are certified lunatics. Caligula and Nero are the names that immediately spring to mind. But things really seem to kind of stabilize by the time that Nerva comes to power. Nerva, you don't really need to know anything about him, but he is the first of the so-called 5 good emperors, starting with Nerva, ending with Marcus Aurelius. So you need to be able to explain that. What is so good about these 5 emperors? Why does Rome have such a why does Rome flourish in the way that it does in that roughly 100-year period? From the end of the 1st century CE to the end of the 2nd century CE. So be able to talk about that. And don't just focus on politics as you read. You start drowning in political history after a while. But fortunately, your Western world reading also has a fair amount on social and cultural history as well. So what's Roman society like during this time? And what are some of the big developments, including alarming, worrying developments? And you'll read that Augustus himself was quite agitated by certain trends in Roman society during his time. So be looking for that. And then, be able to characterize Roman imperial culture. What were Romans like? What was Roman culture like from Augustus to Marcus Aurelius? What did people like to spend their time doing? What forms of entertainment did people enjoy? And entertainment is rarely just entertainment. Entertainment can also tell us a lot about cultural values as well. So, for instance, what does it mean that Romans loved going to these gladiatorial combats on a regular basis? And finally, try to make a connection between Roman culture and Roman politics at this time. One of the big challenges for Roman emperors during this period is, providing some kind of unity and cohesion in this transcontinental empire, an empire that spanned 3 different continents. How are you going to do that? How are you going to give people in North Africa a sense that they are Roman? Well, culture is going to play a big part in that, I think. Well, I'm very proud of myself. I'm not even to the 15-minute mark, and really I've said what I want to say. So I'm going to stop.